So first, a question for all of you, just to get a sense who's in the audience. Who out here would consider themselves an engineer? Okay. And how many of you are interested in learning to code, maybe have dabbled a little bit, but don't actually think you know how to write code? Awesome. Those are about equal numbers, by the way, for everyone who can't see from where I am. Okay, so I'm going to tell you my story of how I learned to code and built a feature for my startup, which is the Daily Muse. So I am the founder, editor-in-chief, and now our rogue developer at the Daily Muse. And for those of you who raised your hand in the last group, 2.5 months ago, that was me. I had done some programming as a kid. I first learned in Visual Basic. I had not written a line of code in 8 years. So let me see if I can make this work. One of these buttons has to work, right? Not that one. All right, you're going to figure out how to get my first slide. So the Daily Muse is an online career resource aimed at professional women. We have a magazine with a lot of career advice, and we also have a job search platform where we profile companies that are cool places to work to help people discover what might be a good cultural fit for them. So the first slide I'm going to show you is what our website looks like. Here we go. So this is our profile of Pinterest. And in addition to giving you a look inside the office, we also have jobs on the site. So you can look for a job if you decide you like what Pinterest looks like might be a good fit for you. You can look for where Pinterest is hiring. So if you go to the next slide, it was these little help wanted tiles at the bottom. You could click on them, apply for those jobs. But one of the things we wanted to build as a company that was a job resource, job search platform was a place that you could actually search for jobs. In the first version of our site, you could go to the bottom of the page and find 2 jobs, but you couldn't search them. You couldn't search for all the engineering jobs or all the jobs in San Francisco. And this was on our to-do list, something that was relatively important to us as a business, but just hadn't made it to the top of our developers' priority list. I decided this was something that I wanted to see if I could build. So to go back 2 months ago, I had kind of been in this place where I was like, oh, I really think I should learn how to code. It's been on my to-do list for a while. I was on a plane trip. I downloaded all the lessons for Learn Python the Hard Way and just started working them on the plane. Worked for plane to West Virginia, back, kept working on them. It's like, okay, I feel pretty good about this. Like, I understand how to do these exercises. I'm pretty sure they have nothing to do with this really pretty website that our developers built. But I feel like I know a little bit. I got back, went back to work as editor-in-chief. 2 months went by, and I didn't really know what the next step was. I read a little bit of the Django book. I was like, okay, I get that lesson too. Still don't know quite what to do with that and how it can help me make our site better. So I went to a developer. I was like, can you show me our code? So he downloaded all of the code onto my computer, and I opened it up and had this real revelation that I actually understood a lot of it. I'm not saying I could build it from scratch, but I could read through it and be like, oh, so that does this does that, and saw how it all fit together. And that was the first kind of big eye-opening step in realizing that, like, oh, maybe I could build something. The next day I was talking to our developer about this jobs idea that I had. I wanted to make all the jobs searchable and have them all in one place, and there were issues with the way our database was set up that actually made this very difficult. I had this moment of, wait, I think I see an easy workaround. I'm going to build this. So I went home that night and started working on it, and 6 days later, we had built the feature. There was a job listing. This goes down. There's 150 listings on the page. They're searchable and sortable, and we launched it. And when you tell the story that way, it sounds like it was magic. I just went home, learned to code, and wrote all this code up. 6 days later, it was beautiful and perfect and launched to the world. And I think one of the most important and interesting parts of that story is actually what happened during those 6 days. Took me about a day and a half to get together a mock-up that kind of sort of worked. You could see that there were different jobs that you could click on them. They were really ugly. I showed them to one of my co-founders, and she was like, okay, all right, we'll wait till the developers get to that. And it went through many iterations. There were points that I was completely stuck. And there were things I was very proud of and no one else could tell why they were a big deal. was like, oh, I got the text to look in 2 different formats. People are like, okay, like that's not gonna help. But the point is, the first iteration took about a day and a half, and it was ugly, and it used the database. It kind of pinned off another table in a way that it shouldn't have. I needed to put a new table into the database instead of using an existing one. I had no idea how to do it. I wrote some code for it, didn't work. Tried it again, didn't work. Took it to our developer and was like, hey, what am I doing wrong? He's like, well, you have to migrate the database. And I was like, what does that mean? So he explained it to me. And I was like, oh, okay, now that I know that you have to migrate a database to change it, and you've shown me how to do it, I can go back and apply that to this feature I'm building. And the whole 6 days was like that. It was version after version that was a little bit better, a little bit better. But I guarantee you, when I sat down to start building this, I had this idea of how I might do it. I, at that time, had no idea that I had to migrate a database. I had no idea that I needed to use CSS in addition to HTML to make this look pretty. There were many things that I kind of learned along the way. And I think when people tell the story of how they built things, sometimes it sounds like they just had this insight, sat down, and wrote it start to finish. No editing, no revisions, maybe a couple little tweaks here and there. But that whole 6 days was a huge learning process for me. And I think it's important that people realize that. And then when you look at developers who've built these great things, they didn't just sit down in a room and just build them start to finish and make them come out perfect. And I think, so there's 3 things in learning to code that I think, 3 pieces of advice I would have. First is not to follow directions and not to think that you have to do things the way they're told. So one example is here. We were going to build this in a much more complicated way. We found an easier way to do it, and it worked great. That goes when you're working on lessons, too. If there's a book, I use Learn Python the Hard Way. I guarantee you, if you opened up those files on my hard drive, none of them look like the examples in the book. I changed them. I tweaked them. I made them better. I made them worse in many cases. But it wasn't about just copying and following directions. I think sometimes people think tech, programming, it's one of those sciences, there's a right and wrong answer. It's actually a lot more creative. It's a lot more like, I compare it to writing. Maybe it's because I'm an editor. But you don't write. If you read a tutorial on writing, it doesn't say, the first sentence is this, the second sentence is this. It tells you how to write. And then it becomes a creative process where you create something. Second is break things. If you don't know how something works, break it, and you'll learn how it works. I always tell Alex, I'm like, I'm going to see how this breaks. And that's how I learn. And the last one is don't give up too soon. If you looked at my code a day and a half in and a product a day and a half in, you would have assumed that I had no idea what I was doing and that I would never be able to build this. But the point isn't what you are at day 1.5 or day 5 or anywhere that is 80% of the way there. Just keep going, and you'll get there. Thanks.